to the second introduction in part 2 to the new practice that I am introducing known as Mensteopathy. Now, in the idea of Mensteopathy, I began to understand a particular notion, which is that in the idea of understanding both men and women, not just in their physiology, but in the psychology of their being themselves, which is rooted deeply in their own biological processes, which then create what is known as their own individual personality based on their individual process that binds their individual cells and molecules to that particular resonant body, that soul, that energy. And understanding that both men and women have a different physiological and psychological process, you must not just understand the body, but you must also understand the mind and how each separate sex experiences both their own physiological processes, but as well their own mental processes, and how each feel a release in order to rid themselves of the emotions they each attach to these particular emotions when they are not together. Because the problem between men and women we're currently seeing in modern day and age is that between men and women we're no longer able to essentially connect in a healthy way, which has resulted in a lustful behavior because we are no longer able to connect and find a true partner. We can actively say, yes, that is a person I can actively create family with. If you cannot create family with healthy familial values based around the way you have been acting in your reproducing matter, what do you think your children are going to then end up looking like? And then we end up looking into the repetitive patterns that which when we combine these two sexes now experiencing these repetitive patterns, we see a downward spiral in human history where we are degenerating and degrading the human experience. We are desensitizing ourselves from the human experience. And so in the treatment of Mensteopathy and the understanding first of both the physiological and psychological process, we first have to start with the second creation, the woman, because a woman gave a hint. You see, if a woman has herself her own cycle, which she experiences in her body, it means that in her mind she does not have the same process. Whereas in a man, he does not have a cycle in his body, which means now in his mind he has a process, a cycle of its own. And when we can heal the cycle of the man, we can find a correlation to the cycle of the woman. Because both correlate in a sense, if you wish. It is that infinite torus of energy, that infinite figure eight, where we create creation together. Once we can heal, not just in our creation aspect of things, but in our own self, where we can learn to really get to the core and the nitty-gritty of things. Would you not want your future sons or daughters to know a better way of life? Well, we can actively create that change, and it starts with you. Whether you are still currently a parent, are about to be a parent, are thinking about becoming a parent, or have yet to experience the idea of thinking you want to be a parent because you are still dealing with trauma, but the trauma remains there the entire time. It is simply how you change your approach and your strength that gave you the ability to say, I'm ready to be a parent. But in being a parent, you became visible because now we can all see your repetitive patterns in your children. And how your children behave are now a result of understanding that that is based on how the parent has raised them. And so even in understanding you might be ready to be a parent, you might now be thinking to yourself, have I been a bad parent my entire life? That is up to your moral compass, which is another part of the Mensteopathy. The understanding of what is right and what is wrong, which we as a society are now pushing the idea to push and popularize certain things which some may feel are wrong, some may feel are right, but in that same pattern of that infinite figure eight, that Taurus energy communicating between the two sexes. If we heal as people, we heal as a civilization, we heal as a planet. And the Tzolk'in, which is a Mayan practice, speaks of rhythmic cycles within the universal laws emanating from the center core of the universe, which is then passed down through radio frequency, mental energy, sound. And through this sound, we actively see changes in eras which are past, where we can truly resonate in different manifestations in our lives as people. These have been called the measures of time, which in the measures of time we can analyze the human evolution of those eras and see psychological patterns that repeat themselves as we progress further and further and further. That is what the Tzolk'in was. It was meant to be a psychological measurement of time to understand how the patterns of human existence repeat themselves throughout the eras, and where can we get to the particular point rooted in the human experience where you can find the true nature behind the act of the incidential point. And the act of the incidental point is the creation of that pattern. And when we can find the release point of the emotion attached to that pattern, well, then you can find a healing portion. And in the healing, you find a transmutation, a change, where you have not necessarily changed states as a physical body, but in your mind, you saw a alchemical process where you have changed from one particular state to another, from positive to negative or from negative to positive. The way you choose to switch back and forth eventually becomes a similar pattern you see in the story of the angel Michael, which at the point of your death, you may now be faced with the judgment of the angel Michael. And in the understanding of the angel Michael is the understanding of the judgment, which is the bearing of the weight of your soul, or a memory of your soul. Which, if the angel Michael now presents you with the question, based on the memory you regret the most in your life, does your being outweigh that memory in its goodness? Because if you cannot outweigh your worst memory in your soul as a being, then you may not ascend beyond that particular point. And in the idea of healing, we have to change the way you feel the weight of that particular burden. And so, welcome to part 2. of the beginning of the introduction to the practice known as Mensteopathy. Thank you.